Hi, everyone. This is Caroline Best, founder of Tao Horsemanship and Everything Horses and More podcast, and the Wisdom of Tao, Path to Inner Alchemy. So today I'm going to be reading from a book that I just started the other day, and I'm just going to read a chapter. Haven't even finished the whole chapter from this new book. And I was struck because I happened to open it up randomly, not even from the beginning, and it came to a chapter that was absolutely fitting to an article that I posted recently, as well as some of the feedback that I've been getting from my students in our personal coaching, whether it's with their own personal lives and where they are, and their relationships with two-legged and four-legged, specifically their horses. So this chapter was also fitting for me as a teacher because it really validates the work that I've been doing for the last 25 years. Actually, the work I've been doing my whole life, but I haven't been consciously aware. I don't know what the correct or proper wording is: mature, wise, consciously. Our consciousness changes all the time and evolves. Aware as an adult at this stage in my life. The powerful impact of what I'm about to read, which this author has written a book about. So, this book is by Ryan Muncie. My husband actually bought this book. He thought it was going to be of interest to him. And when he started reading it, he realized that it is so much about what I do. And the book is called, believe it or not, F Your Feelings. I think you all know what that means, F, your feelings. Master your mind and accomplish any goal and become a more significant human. And you'll get why it's called F Your Feelings. And that's another interesting point of where I opened this book up because he explains why. It's not a long explanation, but he explains why this book is titled this way. This particular chapter is called Marshmallows, Making Marshmallows, and the Ulysses Pact. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Ulysses, the Greek god. I think it's going to, or I hope it's going to help a lot of you connect some dots, especially my students who listen to my podcast, connect the dots in my big Dream Riding Partnership program that is designed for both you and your horse to develop together from the inside out. And when I say inside, I'm talking not just spiritually, but also through your nervous system, regulation, and heart coherence, trauma, trapped emotions, chakra balancing, and healing. And for those of you that listen that are not familiar with my work at this depth, the depth that my program provides, it'll validate more for you that I've been on the right track intuitively, because 25 years ago, the internet was nothing like it is today. And the type of knowledge that's out there regarding the brain and neural pathways and how we learn and how we can heal trauma somatically, physiologically through the nervous system for both us and horses, it just wasn't there 25 years ago. But I was already on the road to understanding this because of the personal work I did with myself as a teenager. And I'll explain that as we get into this podcast. I just never thought that the work that I was doing for myself to heal myself would be the same kind of work that would work for horses as well. It's just so powerful. This podcast will also give you insight into how, as a human species, we are hardwired. And it's going to break it down to two particular areas, which really does help you understand why we continue to do what we do and why it's so hard for us, specifically in today's society and technology, why it's so hard for us to evolve inwardly in the way that gives us peace and serenity and the ability to connect with our loved ones on a deeper level, no matter if they're two or four-legged. And a lot of my students have a really hard time connecting with their horses the way in which I teach, the way in which they see me do, because their bodies, they're just not in touch with their bodies. Our culture, specifically the Western culture, just does not teach practices, and practices in a way that helps you stay in touch with how you feel. Instead, we're taught through, the way we're socialized, the way we're brought up, our family dynamics, not to talk about how we feel, not to feel how we feel. And of course, with technology today, we keep evolving technically. Our brains keep getting larger and expanding cognitively, which takes us further and further away from who we are inwardly, how we are truly designed, which we are a mammal. We are just like the rest of the mammals out there. We're hardwired similarly through our nervous systems, which you can equate to an intuition, a guttural feeling, a knowing that doesn't come from the mind, it comes from the body. We're just so disjointed and disconnected. And so this particular chapter, this book is fantastic, but this particular chapter will give you an idea why and give you a lot of hope. I certainly hope so. So again, we'll start with the chapters called Making Marshmallows and the Ulysses Pact. How do you do anything is how you do everything. Buddhist saying. I imagine cities being in an empty interrogation room. I imagine sitting, sorry, in an empty interrogation room. It's a cold, featureless room with only a metal chair and table. Imagine being in an empty interrogation room. It's a cold, featureless room with only a metal chair and table. In front of your table is a two-way window where you know people on the other side are watching you. An emotionless man in a white lab coat hands you a marshmallow and says, "If you can delay eating this until I return, I will give you a second marshmallow." What do you do? How long would you last before eating the marshmallow? This is the premise of the famous and oft-cited Stanford marshmallow experiment, where kids are given a marshmallow and left alone in a room. The researcher tells the kids that if they can hold off on eating the marshmallow until the researchers return, they will be given additional marshmallows. What the kids don't know is that the researchers aren't coming back. Eventually, the kids give in and they eat the marshmallows. Interestingly, the researchers continued to follow these kids throughout their adult lives, finding that the kids who delayed eating the marshmallow the longest performed the best in school, went to better colleges, got better jobs, and generally led more successful lives all around. Why? The single marshmallow represents instant gratification. Those who delayed eating the marshmallow the longest demonstrated that they had tools or techniques to help themselves delay gratification. Those same strategies served them well throughout life. Researchers concluded that was the reason for their high performance in school, work lives, and in life in general. The first time I heard this study being explained, even before I heard the results and findings, I was envisioning myself in that position, wondering what I would do. And this, of course, is the author speaking. I don't eat sugar, I don't eat junk, candy or marshmallows. So in my mind, I imagined all the different ways I could destroy the marshmallow. I also saw myself destroying it immediately, as in the very second it was presented to me. This action, taken at any moment of highest alignment with my desired outcome, would ensure that no matter how weak my future self became, there would be no marshmallow to eat. As I interviewed neuroscientists for this book, as well as high performers, I discovered that behavioral scientists called this action the Ulysses Pact. This pact between present and future self is named after the literary character Ulysses Odysseus in the original Greek mythology, who craftily fashioned himself to the mast of his ship in order to immobilize himself so he would not be tempted by the siren songs that lured ships into rocky waters and ultimately sank them, killing everyone on board. To further his chances of survival, Ulysses had his crew fill their ears with wax so they would not hear the siren song and would not be tempted. He directed them to ignore his predictable temporary madness that the songs would incite and only untie him after they had passed the island. As an extra incentive for his men not to untie him, he promised he would kill any man who betrayed his directives. Ulysses knew of the coming temptation. He knew his limits, and he made a pact between his current and future selves. He rigged the game to ensure success for his future self. This is a strategy that high performers use throughout their lives, and is one that can surely help us delay instant gratification in the pursuit of our highest goals, no matter how good the marshmallow looks in the immediate present. Awareness. Awareness creates choice. Bill Harris. So far, we've explained the neuroscience, and this would be in a previous chapter, which I'm not reading. But so far, we've explained the neuroscience that explains how our subconscious beliefs and operating systems assign meaning to our physiological states, which in turn creates the emotions and feelings that drive 95% of our decisions. The key word here is physiological, not psychological. So this is me speaking, Caroline. A lot of this chapter, as I began reading it, um, was just like I said, it was like drop the mic or aha moments because I talk so much about this in my work. And in this section, in this chapter, we'll reverse engineer the decision-making process, working backwards from our desired result to identify the actions we can control to cultivate the physiology. We'll also be speaking with high performers. In this section, we'll reverse engineer the decision-making process, working backwards from our desired result to identify the actions we can control to cultivate the physiological environments that facilitate high performance and enable us to make the choices that are congruent with our goals that we have for our lives, no matter what the internal or external circumstances may be. In other words, this is where we'll learn to create an unbeatable mind that provides us the fortitude, resiliency, willpower, or mental toughness to see things through, overcome adversity, and get the results we want and need. Back to our original question, if we know where we want to be, why is it so damn hard to get there? What prevents us from becoming that person? What are successful, high-performing people doing? And why are they the exception rather than the norm? As we've seen, our bodies, our beliefs, and operating systems the subconscious programming we run on, the narratives we tell ourselves, the resulting emotions, feelings, thoughts, and decisions that they drive, are unwittingly leading us astray. When these transient emotional states take the wheel, they guide us in the direction of impulse and instant gratification, not necessarily the original plotted destination. In these situations, we're like a raft set adrift on the vast ocean, subject to the whims of the tides and winds. We are far from in control of our course. It'd be like stopping at every exit on the highway because of a compelling billboard or shiny object when you know your destination awaits you 300 miles down the road. It stands to reason that increased awareness of these internal battles will afford us better choices, which can drive better decisions, leading to better actions and ultimately outcomes that are more in line with our desired goals. Start acting as if you're already that version of yourself that you want to be. So in this chapter, this section will explore how heightened awareness and elevated consciousness reduce blind spots, show us choices we may not otherwise see, and facilitate better decision making. We'll also explore something scientists call choice architecture, a method of making deals with our future selves, like Ulysses did, to limit potential choices and create better defaults for ourselves. To understand how we can heighten our awareness, create more and better choices, and ultimately control our thoughts and decisions for more favorable outcomes, we need to meet our limbic system and our prefrontal cortex. So this is me, Caroline, speaking, and I'd like to go astray for just a little bit to talk about a situation that happened over Thanksgiving. So this is the week after Thanksgiving, 2025. And this is, to me, is a perfect example. And again, I had not read this book yet. And so I believe everything happens for a reason. I believe in the law of attraction. I believe in manifestation. I find it beyond ironic that I open up the book and the chapter in this book that gave me absolute meaning and understanding as to why I and how I responded to a family, it was emotional for me, a trigger for me, family event over Thanksgiving. And without getting into personal details, had a wonderful Thanksgiving. It was the first time my husband and I could bring my mom up to see my one brother and his family and his wife's family. And it was just beautiful for my 89 going on 90-year-old mom. She's not in the best health, as you can imagine, and had a really wonderful uh, holiday without a doubt. But there was one particular instance, the night before we were leaving. Um, we all have family members we don't get along with, or extended family that, for whatever reason, it just doesn't flow. And I wouldn't say that I don't like this person. It isn't anything that bad, or it's not always a comfortable situation. And I'm not the only one that feels this way, at least not on, my particular immediate family dynamic. And, it's 8 o'clock at night. My husband and I sitting in front of the fire in the living room. My brother's talking to my mom. You know, the older boys are around. My husband's going to be taking them out for a couple of drinks in an hour. I'm going to stay behind, hang out with, my family. And, and I found it extremely rude that one of the extended family members decided to play a board game at the dining room table and not invite my husband and I, and we're sitting right there. And it wasn't that we weren't invited, it was our last night. And, I believe that we should all be family and do something together and not be separated. Um, and again, this was my trigger. I'm not blaming anyone. No one, nobody did anything wrong. But based on my core principles and values, that bothered me immensely. I did not take it personally. This was not, and even if it was personal, it doesn't matter. It wouldn't surprise me with this particular person. It doesn't matter. Um, it really doesn't, because family comes first and we all just want to get along. And I'm not afraid of confrontation. So if I needed to stick up for myself or someone else, I certainly would have. But it was just wow. And it was so rude and blatantly rude. Um, and definitely in the background of my subconscious was the understanding that this person wasn't even going to be there and that it would be solely our time together. Because, we also sometimes go up there before Christmas or between Christmas and New Year's. And yet that's not a good time for us because this person and her family is there. So that was in the background, definitely annoying me and a definite trigger. And thank God I was in a better place in my mind. And it definitely relates to the chapter. And you guys will understand more and more because we're literally talking about the limbic system and the prefrontal cortex. And normally I would have been, my behavior, especially with my family, there's so much past drama and negative experiences and triggers. I would have taken this personally, made it more personal, and honestly, to me, I would have perhaps exaggerated, or even if my point was fair, as far as my principles and my beliefs and my values, I still, should be able to handle it differently than my past self. And I did handle it differently. And that's what I'm saying. And the most awe-struck moment of this, and they're going to talk about this in the book, and I've talked about this often throughout the years in my lessons with my clients and in some of my podcasts, is being in the moment where I call it transcending, where you're looking down on yourself in that situation and you're hearing yourself, you're seeing yourself, and you're objective, you're not attached. You have a moment to go, wow, did I just hear what I just said? Or wow, that's what I'm thinking. And so I was in that moment where I could hear myself thinking and feel myself getting worked up. And I was able to say to myself, no, you're not going to do this. And you're going to look like the bad guy. And you're going to feel horrible. And it's going to ruin the evening. And it's not worth it. And walk away. Let it be. Let it be. You can't change that person. You can't change what's going on right here and now. Let it be. Remove yourself right now, Caroline, and do not think about this. Do not talk about it. Do not dwell on it. Do not keep playing those negative emotions over and over. Stop it. And as soon as that was going on, my husband, who's not always the best help, was an amazing help and said to me, let's go downstairs because they have a beautiful, full room downstairs, game room too. Let's go downstairs and play some pool. And that's what we did. And I can't tell you, it did take me about 5 more minutes of talking to myself and coaching myself and literally practicing what I preach, exhaling, releasing, and focusing on the damn pool table, the damn game of pool. And it went away. I could not believe this is the first time in my life that I had been so aware and able to interrupt and stop myself and also help myself let it go through my body. That's the physiology of it all. Through my body, I could feel the tension and the adrenaline leaving my body and being replaced with literally being in the moment. And honestly, if my husband had not been there, because he can sometimes, that's the drama of our relationship, and that's a whole nother conversation. He can often trigger me, trigger stack me. That's my issue. I'm not blaming him about any of that. But, had he said the wrong thing or anything could have changed it. I don't know if I would have been strong enough. I don't know. But this is the power of what this chapter is going to help you understand. And it really comes down to the limbic system. And the book's going to explain that the limbic system is our self-preservation. It's our freeze, fight, or flight. And we are all hardwired this way. This is the mammal within us. This is thousands of years of, we haven't evolved. We're still that animal. But the prefrontal cortex keeps evolving and in a good way. But the biggest thing with this podcast, with the teaching, with the learning, is awareness and checking yourself. And it begins for me, and from what I've been reading that supports my journey in this process for myself and my own healing, is it begins not just with self-awareness, but it begins with the tough work. It begins with sitting and being with the uncomfortable. And this chapter is going to talk a little bit about that, how we are programmed to not think about uncomfortable feelings, address uncomfortable feelings, talk about uncomfortable feelings. We literally do not have any skills because 99.9% of art always happens in the way we're raised, right? Our family dynamic doesn't communicate, doesn't talk about things. And so the beauty of all of this, and I know that we all suffer from this to one extreme or another. And I know that out of the thousands of 2 and 4-legged students in coaching and nervous system regulation rehabilitation I've done for mostly horses because people just don't want to go there. But I know for a fact that we all suffer from some level of trauma, in misunderstanding and hurt from our family dynamic. And the key thing for healing is it's you've got to be able to become aware of when you feel the tension first. And that is the physiology. That's the somatic experience. That's in the body. That's the inside of us. That's the nervous system. And unfortunately, with today's, technology and where we're headed with all of our quick dopamine fixes and Facebook addiction and TikTok, quick, 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 quick. It's suppressing that. It's suppressing our ability to be able to be present in our own body and feel what's going on, and then learn what we're feeling and how to work with what we're feeling. It's totally being suppressed. We have such a disconnect from our bodies. It's unbelievable. And, the majority of my students who are drawn to my work, the majority of them, more than 75%, are still having a hard time with my work because of this disconnect. And I cannot reinforce enough that the disconnect is because you are not taking the time to do the work. And even if you're not aware, it's okay. All right. I have an easy solution and the book supports it. I'm going to read about how they're going to support this. It's called meditation, but you have to be able to meditate in a way that you can carry that breath work and that somatic feeling and that meditation throughout your day, throughout your daily activities. Now, my method, for those of you that are in my big program, I teach you how to take this into every activity and every interaction with your horse. But it doesn't have to start with the horse. And for those of you that don't have horses, it starts with you. And it starts with you being able to get connected to your body and feel what happens when you make these changes on a physiological level. And then once you have that awareness, you can take that action, because it is a practice, into sitting down in front of your computer, driving, talking to people, walking, everything you do. You don't have to go to a yoga class twice a week. You don't have to practice this for 15 minutes once a day because that's all you do. You do it then and you leave it there. You've got to be able to take this connection to your body and to your feelings. You've got to be able to pay attention to that, to be able to connect as deeply as you see me connect, as you guys want to connect with the people and the animals in your life. And most of all, in a healthy way of connection. okay, where you're in the parasympathetic nervous system of rest and digest and relaxation and feeling safe. So if you don't feel that way, you're not going to be able to give that to another or share that with another. So this chapter is going to help you understand the evolution of the human brain and the two, particularly the limbic system and the prefrontal cortex, and how we can learn, some of the what I want to say. It's not the talking points, the major talking points of this particular chapter will be awareness, and it will be checking yourself, and it will be a practice. This isn't something you just pick up once and it becomes a habit. The practice has to become a habit. Good news is habits become habits in about 30 days. All right. And when we make those habits, it's called cognitive repatterning. And that's when you create new neural pathways of learning and memory. And when you create the new, it overrides the old. So, where the old is the comfortable way of doing and being, and the new is the uncomfortable, the more you got to keep doing the new until the new becomes the normal. It becomes the comfortable. And there's no way of getting around this. And he explains, Ryan Muncie, the author, why it's so difficult. And I'm trying to simplify it because it gets a little wordy in here, that you have to remember that we are a mammal, that, our nervous system is so similar to our horse's nervous system. And especially the horse, they are super sensitive and super heightened as a prey animal, and that's why they've survived so well. And so ours may not be as sophisticated as the horse or highly evolved, but we still have it. And we have to understand when we feel stress, and when the stress starts stacking, and then it becomes trigger stacking. And so, again, that comes back to awareness. And again, it comes back to connecting to your body. And the best way to do that is through meditation and breath work for so many reasons. There's more reasons why it's so valuable. Okay, getting back to the book. The brain's failure to regulate itself is a source of all human struggle. Bill Harris, it is. And I say all the time that if you don't do the work, you're not going to get there. You have to do the hard work. But once you make that breakthrough, it's there. Remember, the breakthrough is creating the new neural pathways, the new patterns of recognition, the new ones. They're so uncomfortable. You've got to do it enough until it becomes the normal, till it overrides the old. And the good news is it begins to happen within 30 days, towards the end of 30 days. You don't stop there though. You can't stop there. But at least the hardest part is about 30 days. Okay? But you've got to make this a practice. And you can't just get up in the morning and say, I'm going to do my meditation and then go into the chaos and the stress of my day. Something's got to figure out how to get it to click. It's got to click, so that you go, wow, that's what it feels like in my body. That's that wonderful release of endorphin and dopamine that has nothing to do with TikTok or, my addiction to watching all of these videos and reels. It has to do with being quiet and still and feeling and being okay with that quiet stillness. That's the other challenge. So back to the book. So far, we have looked at the difference between feelings and emotions and how our feelings drive our decisions. Remember, this was in the previous chapters. Now we're going to explore how our decision-making process and our emotional resiliency are linked to which of the several internal brain systems that are in control at any given time. Like parallel universes, we have several competing operating systems in our brain that are constantly negotiating with each other, locked in a perpetual game of tug of war. The main systems that we'll highlight here are our limbic system and our prefrontal cortex. You may recognize these from the triune brain theory presented in the last chapter. And I want to add, in my work, I talk about brain games for the horse. And so here we are with the prefrontal cortex that's highly developed in the human brain. And the horse does have a frontal cortex, it's just not that developed. And that is the left side of the horse's brain. The more strategic, the more cognitive, the more problem-solving side, just like ours. The right side is the more creative, the more the self-preservation, the more intuitive, the more sensory aware and sensory processing side, the right. That's where the horse lives predominantly. But what I also want to say to you guys, and I bring this up often, is my extensive study and observation and research of wild horses. Extensive. And there's a difference between training wild horses and studying them and observing them and testing and doing research like I've done. So I spent 20 years living close to Chincoteague and Assateague Island in Maryland. I lived in Maryland all throughout college. Before, well, all throughout college, that's when I moved there, and after college. And so, to put it simply, wild horses are highly evolved. It's like working with a donkey or a mule. And if anyone understands donkey and mules, they are almost an entirely donkeys. I raised a donkey. I had a donkey. They are entirely different. It's like a different species of equine compared to our domesticated horses. So where I'm going with this is our domesticated horses are so screwed up. They are just as damaged and messed up, their nervous systems, as our nervous systems are. They have had so much trauma and confusion and misunderstanding their entire domesticated life. Throughout centuries, they have been dumbed down to the point where they don't even know how to be a horse. I know this. This is a fact. And so when you compare the way wild horses act on a daily basis as a unified herd, and even when bands meet and stallions fight, if you just join any of these wonderful Facebook groups that either have wild horse sanctuaries or they've got cameras out there 24/7 filming the wild horses, you will see how different they are. It's almost boring. They lead such a cohesive, harmonized, peaceful existence. They are in their parasympathetic nervous system 99.9% of the time. They are in rest, digest, and calm, and they feel safe. It's just that 1% when they've got to get up and go, fight or flight from a real threat, a real predator. Now look at our domesticated horses. It's flip it, just flip it completely. 98%, 99% of them are constantly in their, instead of their parasympathetic, they're in their sympathetic nervous system of self-preservation. And, we don't even realize it because most of them are just so checked out and in learned helplessness until they get triggered, till we push them or the trainer pushes them or somebody pushes them and they explode. Trigger stacking. So this is a huge aha moment, and it should be, because that's what makes wild horses like donkeys and like a lot of mules that are a combination of a donkey and a horse. That's what makes them so AKA difficult to train, because they're so smart, and yet they are really easy to train if you treat them with respect and if you honor their intelligence and you figure out that, hey, horses are always willing to work with you. They're hardwired. They are hardwired to seek harmony through their nervous system because that's how they stay safe. They are hardwired, especially emotionally, to seek relationship and deep bonds and family ties. They want to be together. They want to work together. That's how they survive. To me, horses are amazing partners in so many ways. The fact that they allow us to ride them, the fact that they work with us. Now we just need to go to the stage where they choose to work with us and give us all, and there's joy in that work with us. So keep that in mind when we're dealing with our domesticated horses who first need rehabilitation before training. They need their nervous systems to be rehabilitated, to be rewired. And that's what I teach. And once that happens, then it's on. The training is easy. is easy because the horse is such a passive, peaceful creature by nature. They are designed to work with you, to seek that partnership out, that harmony, that flow. Once you find it, then it flows. And it doesn't matter what kind of horse you have. Now, granted, some are more traumatized than others. There's deep levels of PTSD with some horses, just like there are with people. And so it definitely requires a skilled technician like myself or a specialist like myself to help. But the point I'm making is you can do brain games. Horses can learn. You can get them to a point where they are residing in their parasympathetic, and they are autonomous. They're not feeding off of your crazy energy, and they're not feeding off of the environment. They are, but they also deserve and need herd. And why do they need the herd? Because that's also how they feel safe when they can synchronize their nervous systems. And all of this is scientifically proven now. I was doing this years ago before the proof was out there because I am a survivor of a nervous breakdown and a survivor of acute panic attacks as a 15-year-old. So I know what it's like to repair my nervous system because that's exactly what I had to do. But nobody talked about it like that back then. Instead, my therapist gave me a book on Eastern philosophy and medicine and meditation. And that was my first introduction into Taoism and my introduction into meditation. And the reason why is because I could not speak without passing out cold, blacking out, and going catatonic. That's pretty severe. So I am a survivor of a really dysfunctional nervous system that not just went into freeze mode, but was so fried from years of trauma that it literally shut down. My nervous system completely shut down the minute I started to feel anything or have to speak about anything or I was done. So I know how to build. I've been practicing this my whole life as an adult, teen and adult. What I didn't know until I came back into horses was how similar the horse's nervous system is to ours and the hippocampus area of the brain. I had no idea um, that what I had been able to accomplish with my own nervous system could be applied to the horses. And again, it was never mentioned that I was working on my nervous system. I just understood the power of breath and meditation. I was very connected to my body and the physiology, what I felt, and and I paid attention to what the horses were showing me and telling me. And so that's when I found out that yeah, all of this other work, this pressure and release, and this constant trying to desensitize them and flood them all the time to break them into learned helplessness. That still is a common practice. And 25 years ago, it was the most common practice. It also got manipulated and misguided by words. But in action, people were still doing that, even though they were saying, well, we're going to gentle the horse. Well, flooding the horse and desensitizing the horse is not gentling the horse. Constant pressure and release is not gentling horses. You're flooding their nervous system until it shuts down. And that's what makes the horse appear calm. So getting back to us, our nervous systems are flooded. And that's what I try to tell my students. This is hard because you're so disconnected. And we don't need talk therapy. I'm not here to play the loop because a lot of talk therapy re-traumatizes you because you're constantly bringing up the same emotions and thoughts and memories. So I'm not here to get into that. I don't believe in that. There's a time for talking, absolutely, but not when you're so emotionally attached to it. You're just re-traumatizing your nervous system. I've had students that have been in therapy for 20 plus years come and do my work and go through the physiology of it, the action, the movement of it, and begin, they themselves begin to feel the changes in their body, which is the physiological effects of producing endorphin and dopamine and how it overrides all of this adrenaline that you're constantly in. You just don't even realize it. And especially if you've had trauma, which most of us have had in different ways. Your body is stuck in that trauma. And talk therapy doesn't release it. You got to realize that talk therapy doesn't release it. The body has to release it. That's why I've done my studies in chakra balancing and trapped emotions, and why I do the work I do today with the nervous system. So enter Bill Harris, founder of Centerpoint Research Institute, specialist in neurotechnologies for human change, evolution, and healing. When I interviewed Bill a few years ago, he did a terrific job explaining how the limbic system and the prefrontal cortex are at constant interplay inside our minds. Think of it like having a Zen monk and a hormone driven rebellious teenager fighting to control your mind. The impulsive, ego driven teen in this analogy is a limbic system by mythical sirens. Oh, but is a limbic system, and it is responsible for our propensity to be tempted by mythical sirens. Blow off healthy appointments, workouts, meditation times, salads at business dinners, ditch our plans to start that book or business we've been thinking about, spend money we know we shouldn't be spending, or any other dumb decision we know is driven by instant gratification seeking behaviors that provide nothing more than short term satisfaction. That's huge. Bill brilliantly details the difference in both speed and predisposition of these systems, reminding us that it is the limbic system that fires when we walk by the bakery section at Whole Foods and immediately reacts with, "Oh, those cookies look amazing." After that initial reaction, the prefrontal cortex kicks in to remind us that while those cookies look tempting, they may not be our best choice, something called cognitive control. As we detailed in Chapter 1, the limbic system can only focus on the here and now. It is a compulsive ego and dopamine driven system. It is linked to our sympathetic nervous system, commonly known as the fight or flight response. So that's our self preservation. When this fight or flight response is activated, blood flows away from the brain to our extremities for mobilization in response to the perceived threat. So I want to go back to the previous paragraph, you guys. This is me, Caroline. He says it's a compulsive ego and dopamine driven system, the limbic system. So, limbic system is your sympathetic nervous system of self preservation, which is mostly predominantly controlled by adrenaline and cortisol, not dopamine. But dopamine is also an addiction. It's also the most addictive chemical, more addictive than heroin. And that's why there's been so many studies and debates throughout the years of our, you know, online social media use, because all of these quick reels and quick, speedy zaps of information and stimulation actually fires dopamine. And we get addicted to that. That's why so many kids are addicted to their phones. They're addicted to these quick releases of dopamine. However, there is the side of dopamine that coincides with the endorphin release through the parasympathetic nervous system that we want to get to. But it's not through these quick, sharp bursts of energy that overstimulate you and actually wreck your brain. It's a different level of dopamine that you find in movement, that you find in rhythm. That's a whole nother conversation. So when this fight or flight response is activated, blood flows away from the brain to our extremities for mobilization in response to the perceived threat. The hardwired defense mechanism actively diverts metabolic resources away from our brains in these situations, literally making it harder for us to execute high-level mental functions. I literally know what that feels like. How many of you do? I know what that feels like when you're in that state of freeze, fight, or flight. You're not thinking, and it's exhausting. The limbic system is incapable of abstract thought and cannot look at long-term consequences. Now, the limbic system is not all bad. Nothing is inherently good or bad, as we must apply goal and context to the assessment of everything. It's the balance that we must pay attention to. On the positive side, the limbic system is linked to love, creativity, and those survival responses mentioned earlier. The limbic system is beneficial, even life-saving in certain scenarios. But if we let it, the limbic system will overstep its bounds and begin to control our decisions outside of its biologically intended domain. The problem arises when our modern life has us living in chronic, low-grade fight or flight. That's why we freak out if someone cuts us off in traffic, and only much later do we realize the downstream impact this has on the rest of our day. Yes, I'm talking to you, Mr. Posted on social media about some idiot in traffic. But the bigger issue is that, like any neurological process, shooting a free throw, throwing a football, pressing a barbell, or anything most people might confuse for muscle memory, it's actually neurological patterning. Muscles don't have the capacity for memory. It's repetition that creates habit. The more we use this system, the stronger it gets. And they're talking about the limbic system. And the more it becomes our default pathway. But if we start developing the prefrontal cortex and keep using it in strategic ways, then we override the limbic. We still have to have balance, though. And like any other bad habit that makes it harder to break, it means we need even more good repetition with the desired behavior to pattern the new pathway. Think of this as your brain trying to use the interstate instead of an unpaved dirt road. It wants to use the familiar, least resistant pathway. And this is what I was talking about earlier. You're always going to hit that default of going back to what you know, what's comfortable. And that's the least resistant pathway, the paved road. We have to consciously use the dirt road. And this means it's healthy to feel uncomfortable when you're learning and trying to create new habits and patterns of recognition, new neural pathways. You have to feel uncomfortable because that is what tells you you're on the right path. You want the uncomfortable to do it enough until it becomes the new comfort, the new normal. So we have to consciously use the dirt road option until it becomes as worn in as the highway, eventually becoming the way. Running and biomechanics expert Scott Dolly says this repatterning can take between 3,000 to 30,000 repetitions in the new pattern to make it the way. The less conditioned the human, the more reps this will take. If we applied this to running with a new foot strike, a trained athlete might only need 3,000 repetitions to change their neural patterning, while a non-trained, sedentary couch potato with little kinesthetic awareness may require closer to 30,000 repetitions or more. And so this is for any of you out there in your horsemanship. If you're learning something new and you're not skilled as a technician, or you're, even in sports, some type of sports, it's going to be harder versus somebody who has been working with horses for a while or is a professional trainer on some level. It's a lot easier for them to pick up new learning because they've already been exercising not just, the muscle memory, but the mental, the cognitive. We must be prepared to exercise patience as we work to rewire our brains. It won't happen overnight. And let me mention, you can't rewire your brain until you rewire your nervous system, you guys. And so a perfect example would be if you can't handle someone with a loud voice and they're talking loudly to you and you feel like they're stabbing you, and all of a sudden you just tune everything else out and you can't even focus on the task at hand because this loud voice is just triggering you. They're triggering your nervous system. So how can you complete your task or learn anything if your nervous system's completely triggered? You want to get to the point where that doesn't bother you anymore and you can keep focused on what you're doing. So you can't learn, either can the horse, until that nervous system has some level of balance and is mostly residing in the parasympathetic states of calm, rest, feeling safe. So here's the good news. The prefrontal cortex is involved in pattern recognition, learning, and executive decisions, and it supervises the limbic system. So you're actually training it to become good at its natural role. You're strengthening it. Training it, you're strengthening it. So what I'm just also giving you guys kind of a synopsis of how I'm reading this and understanding this so you understand it, because it's kind of a deep read. So the limbic system over, that's what we're operating from all the time, is a limbic system. It's the prefrontal cortex that is there to help us, but if we don't keep using it, it doesn't help us. And if we're stuck in our nervous system and it's dysfunctional, it's dysregulated, then we don't have the ability to strengthen the prefrontal cortex. We don't have the ability to strengthen the brain and make new neural pathways of pattern recognition. It is impossible, and that's what the science is proving. So you must be aware of what's going on in your limbic system. Again, it comes back to awareness. And then you have action to take, learn your breath work, learn how to calm the heart rate variability, learn how to get back in your parasympathetic nervous system. And then it'll be easier, obviously, so much easier for you to start exercising the prefrontal cortex and strengthening it so that it does a better job, like the example I gave you over Thanksgiving for me. Yes, I am a work in progress. I am always learning. And I don't think I'll ever, get over my triggers. They get better. It gets easier. Yeah, I think they're always going to be with me. And I've certainly seen that with a lot of horses. The depth of work that I've done with my own personal horses that have taken years of rehabilitation and foundation, so it stays. But there's still that second or 3 seconds of trigger that you can see in certain situations, but they have the ability to work through it themselves. That's the beauty. Not me. I don't have to help them. That's the power of this. So we have to train it because, as Columbia University professor and author of Computational Psychiatry, a systems biology approach to the epigenetics of mental disorders, Roderick Wallace reminds us, that's a mouthful, emotions are self-regulatory responses that allow efficient coordination of the organism for goal-oriented behaviors. Okay, let's simplify that. When they're working properly, that is. This system of self-regulation is the very reason every neuroscientist has to qualify their statements with some variation of when functioning correctly or when not maladapted. And as Bill Harris reminds us as the lead of this section, the brain's failure to regulate itself is a source of all human struggle. Self-regulation has its drawbacks, and as we've seen, the limbic system is one that needs to be chaperoned closely. While this concept is simple in theory, it is not easily implemented. And even harder to master. Look at this recent study showing just how dysfunctional we are at self-regulating our Facebook usage. The study confirmed that insufficient self-control is a predictor of Facebook addiction. This is in accordance with the general trend presented in the subject literature, stressing that people with good self-control cope better in life, can hold their temper, do not abuse alcohol, keep secrets, and they save money. Also, some findings indicate that people with a high level of self-control can use the internet in a healthy way. Conversely, people with insufficient self-control, aka limbic system running amok, exhibit compulsive behaviors like dysfunctional Facebook use. In other words, people who let their current states, feelings guide their decisions more strongly engage in thoughts related to unpleasant situations. Hence, this is the title, Fuck Your Feelings, of the book. This statement also supports the notion that self-regulating systems cannot objectively measure their impact on the goals of the greater system, the team, in our sports and military analogies, or in the real world. Paraphrasing the researchers, people with dysfunctional limbic system not only engage in negative emotions, thoughts, and behaviors, but they also do not look for solutions. Either they're unaware of this dysfunction, or worse, they don't care. Whether our limbic systems are functional or dysfunctional, you and I certainly care. If you didn't care, you wouldn't be reading this book. Well, you might not have known what you got yourself into with the podcast. So high performers don't become high performers by accident. Evolved, enlightened people do not elevate their consciousness by accident. An examination of the current mental health of the American population and our economy further buries the notion that emotional self-regulation can be in line with our goals for becoming the happiest, healthiest, strongest, and highest expression of self that we can be. So we're going to get into he talks about another author, um, Jamie Wheel, two authors, co-authors, and Stephen Kotler in their book Stealing Fire. Stealing Fire explores flow states, ecstasies from ecstasy, and our growing obsession with gambling, alcohol, porn, and other mind-altering substances used regularly to quite literally get out of our own heads. One thing to note about the work of Kotler and Wheel, their previous book, The Rise of Superman, discusses the value of flow states for optimal performance. In the neuroscience of flow, and I've written about this quite a bit on my website in my blogs, you guys, and I've talked about it, I think, in some podcasts with horses. In the neuroscience of flow, the brain enters a state of hypofrontality, meaning the prefrontal cortex significantly reduces its activity. So it's hypo. It reduces its activity. This is good during performance and should not be confused with the states of awareness we previously mentioned. So to simplify this, you want flow state. You want to practice what you're doing until it becomes second nature, until you don't have to think about it. That's really what he's saying. When performing, be it surfing, rock climbing, or playing an instrument, we want to rely on autopilot systems. So don't confuse autopilot with checking out. It's just second nature. You've done it so that it's ingrained and it's a flow. It feels good. It's releasing the right chemicals in your nervous system. So if Tiger Woods is thinking about his golf swing on the course during a tournament, he's done. Likewise, if the extreme sports athlete is thinking about the mechanics of their sport while performing, they're done or dead. So, looking at the numbers and reflecting on our own personal experiences, it doesn't take long to realize that this self-regulating system is not exactly supporting our goals of emotional evolution and self-optimization. Our biology is wired to look for threats in order to help us survive, and that's our limbic system. We're wired to react quickly. This neocortex or prefrontal cortex is still new, and we're still learning how to put it in charge. So this is don't feel bad. So if you're one of those people that, let's say you're on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being me, or 8 being me, I have a much better access to my prefrontal cortex and control of my emotions and regulating my nervous system. So I'm an 8 out of 10, and you might be a 1 out of 8 and 1 or 2. You might be a 3 or 4. You might be a 5 or 6. One of the keys to change and personal change, personal development, and helping your horses evolve is becoming a good diagnostician. And what that basically means is looking at patterns, testing and looking at patterns of behaviors. So again, it's awareness. What do you constantly see? When is it happening? And can you see the trigger? Can you see what's creating it? The behavior, the feeling, the action in your horse. So that's patterning. And then the diagnostician part of you is okay, once I identify the patterns, now that's the problem. I've identified the pattern. Now I need to rewire. I need to do something different to create the new pattern for myself or for my horse. And a lot of this is testing. And so in my 25 years of doing what I do with horses and people for a living, there's been a lot of testing to see that this does work in these situations. So that's key. So yeah, you gotta figure out where you stand in everything. It's like self-assessing yourself. And what I teach in my program is how to assess your horse, how to assess yourself as a learner, as a confident learner, unconfident learner. How do you learn? how is your horse learning or not learning? You need to have a barometer, right? You need to have kind of like a baseline of this is where we started. How are we progressing or not to get to that goal and how to stay on course. So we have the powers of general observation that show us we live in a world of pain, suffering, and fear, all of which support the notion that these self-regulating systems can run amok if we don't keep them in check. But why? Why are we seeing so much dysfunction? The short answer is that we're still the same species we were 2,000 years ago. And 2,000 years ago, we did not have electricity. We did not have climate controlled environments, cars, planes, internets, yada, yada, yada. So again, there's a huge disconnect. So there are glimpses of our new reality, and they're all too common issues that lead to dysfunction with the limbic system in our lizard brain. Oh, yeah, it's really cool how he talks about the lizard brain. And we all have the lizard brain. Our brains simply haven't evolved and adapted to our new reality. It makes perfect sense that we're struggling to adjust. Well adjusted? Anyone? Anyone? This blissful, peaceful, happy, safe, and utopian state we wish was our default setting can be attained through practice. But remember, it's not our default, and it's harder for some people based upon your nature and your nurture. Your nurture is your learned behaviors. It's a lot harder for me, wicked, wicked hard for me personally, for a long time because of so much of the dysfunction in my family and the trauma to my nervous system for so many years. To paraphrase Tony Robbins, we can always find something wrong if we view our world in that manner. And we're wired to look for and spot those potential threats. We have to train our minds to work for us, not against us. So it's not like you're in denial. It's not like you're not going to acknowledge an unhappy feeling or a bad situation or a threat, but we don't want to stay stuck there with those feelings and playing that loop over and over again. Again, it's tied to our limbic system, our nervous system. There you go. So, how can we do that? We have to train our minds to work for us, not against us. How do we do that? So, the author, we can use the following four-pronged approach, starting with number one, be aware. Number two, be vigilant and watch our brains. I gave you that example of how I was watching myself over Thanksgiving. Number three, do the work to rewire our brains. Number four, develop our prefrontal cortex so it becomes our prevailing system. Awareness over self-regulation system is crucial in our efforts to make it less self-regulating. As Harris points out with the statement, awareness creates choice. Increased awareness is the first step in being able to direct our conscious thoughts to facilitate better decisions and actions. Individuals who were better able to identify and distinguish among their current feelings achieved higher decision-making performance and enhanced ability to control the possible biases induced by those feelings. So the advice to ignore your emotions appears in view of our results not to be the right answer for effective regulation of feelings. Instead, the results suggest exactly the opposite. Do not ignore your feelings. They're messages during decision making. Well, basically, they're messages to tell you that if you ignore them, you're going to make bad decisions. That's as far as I want to go with that message, because I know a lot of practitioners out there want to explore the message behind the emotion. And again, we're trapping, and we're re-triggering ourselves. Sometimes it's great to explore all of that to give yourself a better understanding of why, absolutely, of why you feel the way you do. As I always say, 75% of any solution is awareness, at least 75%. Sometimes, if we just understand why we do what we do, it releases so much pain and enables us to move forward. but we have to be careful about the message behind the emotion. We don't want to get stuck with that. As we can see, high performance decision making is less about ignoring our fears or other emotions and more about acknowledging them than refusing to allow them to cause emotionally driven deviations from our planned course. As Dr. Harris notes, this increased awareness of mental states affords us the ability to have more conscious control over what may otherwise be a subconscious driven decision. Yep, and that was my experience over Thanksgiving. Increased awareness keeps our conscious mind in the driver's seat, not our emotional, rash, impulsive limbic system. As neuroscientist David Eagleman, best-selling author of Incognito, The Secret Lives of Our Brains, wrote, these subconscious decisions tend to run on autopilot, by definition, without our conscious awareness. And these systems are generally a good thing as they allow us to focus on higher level tasks instead of mundane menial processes. The problems arise when the belief systems and narratives that guide these subconscious activities are running a flawed software. While beneficial, even essential, these systems must have some conscious, mindful oversight on our part to ensure that they're steering us in the direction we want to go. And so, again, this gets really wordy. For most of us, we have triggers. We have a dysfunctional nervous system. That's just like the horses, that's at least 98% of humans. And so we need to be aware of what our triggers are, and how you become aware of that is how it feels in your body. Your body is the first place the trigger happens. If you're not aware, it goes straight to your brain. But it's already happened, is what they're saying. The limbic system's already overridden your cognitive function and flooded it with emotions. And then those emotions control what you say and how you act. And how many of us have been in situations, I'm raising my hand, for far too long, where we just regretted how we acted and what we said. And it just, the more you do it, the worse you feel. So you have to get to a point through conscious, a state of consciousness and awareness of what it feels like in your body. And that's the hardest part for everyone because we're so disconnected. Everyone wants to talk about the trigger. And that's what's misleading. And to me, is a bait and switch with therapists so they can make a lot of money. Again, you need to talk. There is definitely a time in life when we have to talk about stuff and understand the message, the meaning behind the emotion. But we don't want to be talking all the time. To me, the talk should be less than 25%. Okay? You need to understand on a physiological level how you feel in your body. And then you need to release that. You need to learn the techniques to release it. And it's not through talking all the time. It's mostly through, like I've said, and even they've pointed out, meditation. Releasing the stress that's being stored in your body, exhaling and blowing it out, giving it away. There's so many ways you can do this. There's so many somatic releases, somatic release therapy that you can do to release trapped emotions and stress. But first, you have to realize when you get triggered in your body, by the time you think about it, you're just 1 second away from reacting and saying or doing something you're going to feel bad about. That's what I'm trying to say. That by the time you think about that trigger, you're too close to it. You got to feel it because it's happening in your nervous system. You got to feel it. And then you have seconds, minutes, hours, days to do something about it. Soon as I can feel that stress, soon as I can feel that anxiety, and I'm consciously aware of it, I have the opportunity to move myself away from that trigger. Even if it's still stuck in my head, I can breathe it out. But if that trigger is in the room and it has to be, and it's another person, I can remove myself from that before it's too late. Okay. That's it. I hope you guys enjoyed this. This book is in some places a hard read, but it's really powerful. And again, it's by Ryan Muncie, and it's called F Your Feelings, Fuck, fuck your feelings. Isn't that crazy? But master your mind, accomplish any goal, and become a more significant human being. And I haven't gotten any further than that paragraph, so I'm pretty excited about the rest of the book, and maybe I'll do another podcast or two. It all depends. Thank you so much. I'm always available. Find me on dowofhorsemanship.com, Caroline Best. Um, Sending you love and light, and may you always be one with horses. Bye bye.